Gestures tend to be polysemous, Keith Thomas writes, and their meaning can only be determined by the context of their occurrence. The title of my paper would seem to have conceded the general context to which I will be referring, and with regards our conference theme, the church itself is where I set my scene, but as regards the audible, it will be distinctly the work of non-verbal communication that is of primary significance. With specific regard to historical studies of gesture, John Walter highlights the lack of source material, bemoaning, references to gesture have been incidental and often descriptive, with consequently minimal analysis of their significance. As J. Burrow outlines, writers very rarely devote much space to the matter, contenting themselves with occasionally noting the strength of a handshake or the sweetness of a look. This casual and incomplete documentation is symptomatic of various forms of non-verbal communication, I would contend. Gestures, extended in poses, inclinations, and facial expression, may be evident when we look for them, but equally may blend into the background of a given situation. In this paper, I'd like to consider two aspects of liturgical gestures which highlight both the challenges and rewards of such a study. Firstly, I will briefly address some of the issues in accessing historical gestures before examining what liturgical texts can offer in terms of heightened understanding of gestural, liturgical, and communicative histories. I would like to begin after the Lenten period itself, describing the feast of Holy Rood, the Speculum Sacerdotal, and an English early 15th century collection of sermons, presents the story of Judas Cyriacus' search for the true cross on the behalf of Helena, mother of Constantine the Great. Threatened with starvation, he agrees to show her the place. And when he was coming forth and yet to the place that had made there his prayer, the place suddenly moved, and there come out the smell of a marvellous savour, and sweetness is so much that Judas made joy with both his hands, and as he had made that it was true that Christ was the Saviour of the world. This short retelling of a miraculous tale from 233 AD, while obviously part of the celebration of the cross and its role in salvation history, serves a more illustrative purpose for my own needs. I would like to focus on 6 words and ponder their meaning for just a few seconds. Made joy with both his hands. Without wishing to turn this, at least not yet, into some kind of meditative cult, I would suggest that we can all conjure a variety of different images in our heads when we consider this phrase. Maybe this, or this, perhaps this. And so on. In demonstrating these potentialities, it seems evident that there is a void here. None of these images is more right or wrong, and they arise because of a certain association we have encountered in the past. In recalling Thomas's words regarding the significance of context, the hands, both described and displayed on the screen, are subject to the situation and timing of their performance, and in another instance, they may carry completely different meanings. The study of gesture, particularly in terms of its original context, is problematic, yet according to Jean-Claude Schmitt, capturing gestures is as elusive today as it was in the past. The primary concern is that gestures are confined to the technology of the recording. They are ephemeral and are furthermore frozen in the text and images which provide our best access to them, while simultaneously violating their very essence, their motion. While descriptions may be useful in comprehending what gestures took place in a given circumstance, they can only provide a limited experience of events. As in the sacerdotal quotation, extensive emotion is implied in the narrative. Yet this sentimentality can often not be sufficiently translated from the embodied performance to the textual inscription. It is lost in the gap between language and experience, discourse and embodiment. Subtleties of emotion in enactment are lost as the alphabetic structure alienates the gestures being performed. Similarly, images and statues fail to capture the emotion involved in the movements, providing an incomplete depiction of the subject. Neither text nor image is a perfect medium for recording the work of gestures, as their emotion is not confined to meaning, but stretches to other prosodic elements of interaction, including atmosphere, mood, and rhythm. The liturgy, as the focal point of church attendance, was in many ways a ceremony of bodily presence and performance. While at Mass, the congregation were neither to stand nor to slouch against pillars or walls, but to kneel and pray meekly and quietly on the floor. There were certain moments in the Mass where they might rise, Duffy tells us, highlighting Merck's instructions for parish priests, which requires the priest to tell the laity to rise at the reading of the Gospel. That the people were required to kneel for the most part, while making gestures such as raised hands at appropriate times, suggests a liturgy of ritualistic conformity, while the learned priest made more distinctive actions such as ascending or descending the altar steps, changing positions at the altar, extending his arms, or turning towards the congregation. As such, gestures inhabit the liturgy. They are a guiding force and make visible the teaching of the late medieval church, contributing to a graphic and sensual piety. Thomas remarks that in liturgical and indeed legal and ceremonial contexts, the speaker's posture and body movement may be more important than the words uttered, and this significance is not lost during the Easter celebrations of the Church in 15th century England. I would now like to return to the Speculum Sacerdotal, a text which makes visible many church observances and symbolic acts of the contemporary liturgy. Drawing heavily on Boethius' Rationale Divinorum Officiorum, it offers access to some of the unique gestural aspects of the liturgical calendar through the guiding sermons aimed at priests. The Sacerdotal outlines some seasonal alterations to the typical liturgy, especially between Maundy Thursday and Easter Sunday, and particularly striking with regards to gestural performances. Holy Week begins, perhaps earlier than we are accustomed to, on the day before Palm Sunday, and with the homily revolving around the story of Christ eating in the house of the leper, Simon, where Mary and Martha washed his feet with her tears and wiped him with her hair, and brought ointment and anointed his head, recounting when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples and said, "If I wash your feet, that is Lord and Master, and each one of you oweth for to wash other." This sentiment of self-abasement lies at the centre of the Easter liturgy, as we shall see, and is therefore established at this early point. In preaching a sermon on this subject, the priest reminds his congregation of the sacrifice of Christ and the lengths he went to serve his people, encouraging them to emulate these devotions quite literally in their performance of bodily gestures and rituals. Maundy, or Sheer Thursday, saw the Easter celebrations intensify, as after the Tenebrae celebrations, the people were promised by the clergy, "Fall down and by our power be assailed of your sins, if ye will sorrow for him and love him." The Sacerdotal again describes the washing of the feet on the Thursday, reinforcing the necessity of subordination by all within the Church, and reminding the people once again of the actions of Christ before his sacrifice on the cross. The abasement is metaphorically represented during the Sheer Thursday services also, as the congregation each hold a hand of wax, by which is represented the hand of Judas, which was flexible and bowing as wax unto evil, by the which a hand Christ our King and very lantern was betrayed, and for the time was extinct and quenched. This use of the candle as a sign of the destructible nature of human morality is significantly equated with flexibility and bowing. In doing so, the services mark the subordination of the candle as equivalent to the bowing action of a person. The bowing of Jesus' hand is imagined as him literally bending or breaking, with weakness in his deference obviously implied. In considering this dual image of subordination, it is worth recalling the words of Bruce Holzinger, who notes that the Mass may well be a locus of divine mystery, but it also supports a degree of aesthetic invention which is fully human in its knack for contradiction, subversion, and error. Indeed, this understanding of bowing as both a sign of faithful deference and treacherous weakness demonstrates a contradiction replicated with regards to Judas later in the Easter celebrations, as we shall see. Once more, on Good Friday, the sermons return to the washing of the feet. I've just included Connacht the Elders' impressions of, on the left is the is Jesus washing the feet, and on the right is the Pope having his feet kissed. This is sort of late 16th century, so it is perhaps giving you an idea as to where these ceremonies have led. But on Good Friday it is described how Jesus rose from the dinner table at the Last Supper to provide the service to his disciples, giving a good example of humility and lowness. And also marvel it was that he girded him in the manner of servant and took form of a servant. This repetition of this ritualistic act leaves the laity in no doubt as to the level of servitude and penance demanded of them. And as if the narrative does not explain this sufficiently, we are further told, when he had done that office of humility, he thought why he had done it, saying, Knoweth that I have now do unto you, and ye call me Lord and Master, and so ye say, for so I am. But then saith I that am Lord and Master wash your feet, then most you shown to their other for to wash their feet. For if I be the Master, learneth of the Master. And if the Lord shame not, let not then the servant shame for to do that which the Master did. This places the washing of the feet on the final instructions given to the followers of Christ, after the breaking of bread and sharing in his body and blood. The emphasis placed on the equal expectations placed on Master and the faithful demonstrates the role of the body as a mode of equal performative power. By insisting on the need to wash the feet of his followers, the passage above attempts to remove any discomfort in lowering oneself to do service to another, and therefore creates a binding requirement to not shirk from following Jesus in such gestures. Indeed, the sacerdotal at this point announces that we owe to cleanse our feet, that is to say, to cleanse our affections, for their feet be defiled with the clay of lechery and be cut with sharp stones of covetous, or for they be blown with bullying pride. Feet are called the hearts of men, for right as man goeth by her feet, so doth the mind by affection of heart. In constructing such an image, an emphasis is placed not simply on the feet, but also on the touching and cleansing, which are coupled with their purification, and by extension the subordination which such actions would require. By describing the feet as the means of transport through a world of moral and physical grime, the sacerdotal equates the feet with the heart, placing the feet at the centre of the spiritual well-being of each individual. The other substantial gestural emphasis of the Easter regimen surrounds the use of the kiss in a variety of forms. The sacerdotal informs us that the late medieval church sought to follow not the shrewd imitation of the Jews that they made when they took counsel to betray Christ, and the cause for that we use not kissing for as for peace is for the kiss of Judas. The kiss, therefore, is acknowledged as a gesture typically held as a sign of peace and communion between all Christians, but one tinged with the blackness of a single historical event, a time specifically called to mind during the Easter period. This reversal of traditional liturgical performance is not limited, however, to Judas's kiss of betrayal, as the sacerdotal calls to mind further gestures which had their meanings and reverence overturned during the Passion of Christ. Sorry, this is so long, but I think it's important. We bow not our knees for the Jews because of the scorn that they scorned Christ with her bowing, and against the three allusions the Jews made to Christ in bowing of knees and covering of face. We make three prayings, saying, Agios, afore the revelation of the cross, praying 4 times that for us was scorned and reproved in the hall of the bishop and at the bar of the Doom's man, where they asked Pilate for to do him on the cross. And the knights were those that scorned him with bowing knees that time that they set the crown of thorn on his head, which is the cause that we doth that. And the cross is made salutation, for by it was hailed the reformed to man and to the world. And afterward Christ is worshipped and honoured and kissed reverently. The kiss, and indeed bowing, have been compromised in this example. Yet the convoluted response to the potential reenactment of the actions of Judas, or the Jews, to Christ, creates a minefield for performative faith. Relating back to the idea that feet are called the hearts of men, the crucifix is kissed on the feet, But at the same point the sacerdotal warns, Sirs, looketh that ye come not to kiss the feet of Christ with discord, for the devil is father of discords. And he that hath discord with any man, he hath in him the devil, and so he is such one as was Judas, that sold his master and kissed him. While the kiss of peace is disallowed due to Judas' kiss, the kissing of the cross is seemingly acceptable as long as it is done in the right mood. The change of routine may be the necessary reminder of both the intensity and value of the kiss within the liturgy, as rather than kissing the pax board which passed around at Mass, the wounds and sufferings of Christ in the form of the crucifix serve to reinvigorate the spiritual journey of the faithful. Eamon Duffy recounts that the sepulchre was the place of lamentation for the havoc sin had wrought. The parishioners kneeling around it on Good Friday evening were encouraged by preachers to lament their sins, to experience the desolation of the burial of injured innocents. Yet by Easter Sunday, the concept of an altered routine is typified by the sacerdotal's declaration that, in time of Pasch, we kneel not but prayeth standing. At this point, the anonymous author of the sacerdotal does not attribute this inverted position to a reflection of the soldiers' mocking of Jesus, but rather it is to remind the laity that the holy women, that time that they come to the sepulchre, they bowed not with the knees, but they stood up and looked into it. Therefore, the body position of those who discovered that Christ had risen is emulated in celebration. The purpose of kneeling is then explained in conjunction with fasting, for man is called to do both for devotion, that is to say, kneel and fast. The late medieval Christian is suddenly left with a curiously regulated regimen of actions for these few days of the year. Don't bow the knee, but wash the feet of others. Don't kiss each other or the pax board, but do kiss the feet of the crucifix. Kneel to ask for forgiveness, but not on Easter Sunday, but do it fasting and offering devotion. It seems to me, therefore, that the late medieval liturgy was quite concerned with the gestures of the Christian faithful. The speculum sacerdotal represents the envisioned of a parish priest, and while acknowledging Duffy's description of the need to construct the laity at every point, that perhaps seems more understandable in light of the Easter peculiarities I have outlined. Rather than a laity who simply didn't know what they were doing, the idealized demands of their spiritual guides seem to have created a more convoluted routine than we may have previously imagined. The text demonstrates a considerable concern with salvation history, but crucially is so worried about being on the wrong side of the passion, in terms of replicating the mockery of the soldiers or the treachery of Judas. The sacerdotal creates a complex web of gestures, with certain actions being the epitome of devotion one day, but tainted by the scars of anti-Christianity the next. By considering this text, I think a more nuanced version of Duffy's devout congregation begins to emerge, although not one without difficulties. It seems the gestures of the liturgy were distinctly influenced by the Easter celebrations and historical events which they engage with, and in doing so bring to light the significance gestures held in 15th century England, and specifically how they affected the devotion of the people. Yet I wonder quite how far any regulation of such gestures could go. I dare say kneeling or bowing the knee was hardly considered a sin during the Easter period, and one wonders quite how far priests would go in making clear which movements were to be frowned upon and on which days.